Hello and welcome. Today we are going to start the logical formulas. This is the first video of the actual formulas series. So we'll start with the logical formulas, and if you go in the formulas tab, you will see that there are multiple drop downs here, and one of them is logical. So we are going to tackle this one specifically. If you click on the drop down, you will see that there are a lot of formulas listed here. However, I have selected this list out of the complete list, uh, and the reason is these are the most used formulas, and these are something that will cover the most of what you're going to learn during the course, right? So uh, we'll start with true and false. So true and false are basically part of Boolean algebra, and they represent something being true or false. For example, let's say there is an inequality. So equals to 5. So equals to is the start of the formula, right? 5 is greater than equals to 6, which is false, right? So this false represent anything which is of false nature, and if it becomes true, right, this true represents this kind of calculation or formulas or whatever you have uh, as true in nature, right? So you can, for example, if there is a scenario where you want true and false directly and you don't have to do a calculation, you can directly use them. So let's say this true, okay, and this false. Okay, just a reminder. So if you are starting to write a formula, for example, this FA, and then you see a list of all the functions which starts from FA, you can use your arrow keys to navigate down to false. Then you can use tab on your keyboard to fill the formula, and that's it. Okay, the next formula that we are going to cover is AND formula, and what it means is, let me make it a little bigger. If all true, then true, else false. So what it means is, if I start writing the formula, I will see that there are logical 1, 2, and so on parameters. So these three dots represent that this formula can take n number of inputs. So, and it will take inputs in logical uh, format. So what it means is any input that we are going to give in AND formula has to have the output as true or false, nothing else, right? So if you have equalities, equalities as in equals to, like a formula which has equals to in it, and inequalities where you have greater than, equals to, less than, and so on, or not equals to for that matter, right? Those are inequalities. So if you use those kind of calculations within AND formula, they first have to have the output as true or false, and then you can have n number of these calculations within the AND formula. Why it is important? It empowers us to tackle a situation where we want to calculate multiple scenarios being true. For example, if I want to input a number which should be between 0 and 100, right, and nothing else, right? It cannot be negative, it cannot be greater than 100, right? So what I can do is, let's say um, I have this example number which is, let's say, -10, and I want the answer to be false if it is outside the 0 to 100 range, right? So what I can do is, and this number, okay, is greater than equals to 0, and d4 is less than equals to 100, right? So if this is the case, then it will be true, otherwise it will be false, right? So let's try and tackle the input different inputs and get the result, right? So -10 is false, which is amazing, right? If we have 110, it will still be false. Let's say I have 100, it becomes true. 90 becomes true. 0, it becomes true, right? So in this situation where you have multiple scenarios where you want to identify whether all of them are true, you will use AND, right? Otherwise it will give you false. In OR, if any one of the inputs is true, then true, else false, right? So it's a little different than AND formula. Here we are looking at only one condition being true, right? So for example, uh, if I want something to be, let's say, either 5 or 10, I'm satisfied, right? So what I can do is, let's say I take this cell as input and use this as one of the inputs in the OR formula. So let's say OR, right? So if I take this equals to 5 and then take again this and equals to 10, right? So what I'm testing here, if D5 cell is equals to 5 or if it is 10, my answer should be true. That means I desire that situation, right? Otherwise false, right? So if I press enter, you would see it is true. If I put 10, it is again true. If I put 11, it becomes false. If I put 6, it becomes false, right? If I put 0, it becomes false, and so on, right? So a situation where you want at least one of the scenarios to be true, then OR is something that you need to use. Reverse of the Boolean. So what is not? Not is exactly a negation or inverse of your Boolean value. So true becomes false and false becomes true, right? So let's say not, okay, if I put true, it becomes false. If I put false, it becomes true. Why would you need this situation? When you have, let's say, two different kinds of scenarios where you want one scenario to be true and one scenario to be false, right? But the conditions you want to apply is something that will not fit the conventional scenarios, then you would use not to favor your situations. We will look specific examples in the exercise section. Okay, now let's look at by row. This is a special function. So let's look at the parameters first. So by row, right? So it takes an array and then it you have to specify a function, right? So let's do an array first. So let's say I have one array like this, and then I copy and paste it here like this, right? What I need is by row, okay, and I take the entire array, right? And then I can put any of these functions, which could be sum, average, and so on. Let's say sum, okay, and then close the parentheses, and you would see that it has taken all the rows in this range, right? Let me put this formula here. It would make much more sense. Right, so what it is doing is it's taking all the rows in the selected array and it is giving us the sum, right? If I do average, it will give me the average, right? So let's do some random numbering here, right? You would see the averages of each row is being calculated on the fly, right? So by row takes an array, right? And depending on what kind of function you have chosen, right, it could be sum, average, median, and so on. Let's say max, right? And it will give you the output according to the function chosen by row, right? That's the important factor. And I can apply the same function by column. So by column, I take the entire array and I say sum, right? What it is giving me is, let me highlight it. Okay, so by column takes individual rows, right? And it is giving us the sum of those rows because we have chosen the sum as the function. I can very well choose max again, and that's it. It's taking max of all these, which is 1, 45, and 1, right? So that's your by row and by column. So now let's take a look at if formula. So I'll take another section here. I'll just note it down. If formula is one of the most used formulas because it tackles one of the most used situations where we have to identify what is true and what is false, and based on that we have to take a decision, right? So it's a control flow formula where we take the control of the flow based on a situation or scenario being true or false, right? So let's take a very simple example. So let's say I have a number, okay, and I want to identify whether this number is even or odd, right? So I'll start noting down this formula here, which is if, right? So logical test is what? This test will tell us whether this number is um, even or odd. How do we know whether a number is even or odd? So if the number is divisible by 2, it is even. If it is not, it is odd, right? But how do we know whether something is divisible by 2 or not? So we have mod function, uh, mod, and then this number, and divisor will be 2, right? And if it is equals to 0, okay, that means the number is even, otherwise it is odd, right? So let's go to arithmetic operations for a second. And if you remember, we have covered this mod formula, right? What it does is it takes a number and it takes another argument, which is the divisor, and it tells us if we keep on dividing this number using this divisor, what is the remainder at the end, right? So when we divide something by 2, we are left with either 0 or 1 always, right? Take any number, right? And if it is 1, it basically means that the number is odd, and if the remainder is 0, it becomes even, right? So we are using that logic in this formula to figure out whether something is even or odd, right? So let's take a look at this formula once again. We start with if, which has 3 specific inputs. The first is the logical test, which we have explained just now, that we take this number and we take divisor as 2, and we take the mod of these two numbers, sorry, this number with 2 as the divisor, and we test whether it is equals to 0 or not, and that test becomes a true or false, right? Because it is a logical test equals to, right? And based on this value we are saying that if this smaller formula is giving out as true, then print even, otherwise odd, right? So let's test the validity of the formula. So let's make it 6, and you would see it becomes even, right? What happens if we take 0? It becomes even, right? What if we take -9? It becomes odd, and so on, right? So that's a very specific small example of if formula, right? Let's take another example of if. It's a little bit a different scenario. Let's take a normal string A, B, C, D, E, F. Okay, so my problem statement is that I want to say uh, greater than 5 if the length of my string is greater than 5. Otherwise, it will say less than 5. Okay, so let's say if, okay, so what is the logical test? I need to know the length of my string, right? So length of your text, okay, and I say greater than 5, right? So length formula will give me the length of this cell H14, right, which is 6 in this case, and it will test whether it is greater than 5 or not. And based on this, I'll say greater than 5, less than 5, right? So if this is true, this condition, then it will print greater than 5. Otherwise, it will print less than 5, right? So obviously it is greater than 5. Now let's test when what happens if it is less than, right? So this is how if formula works, right? A general note for all the formulas: within a formula you can use other formulas as well, which we have already mentioned in the parameters in a formula section, right? So when you are learning these formulas and you are testing them out using the exercises that we will give you, try and think of different scenarios where you can use these formulas, right? This thought process of thinking about the usage of formulas will further enhance your understandability of situations where you can use them. Hopefully it will help.